music is magic. It's the closest us humans have to magic.
Give me one good reason to leave me. I'll give you 10 good reasons to stay. You're the only one I believe in. I'll be hurt if you walk away. Too many broken hearts in the world. There's too many dreams can be broken into. Too many broken hearts in the world. So I won't give up the fight for you. The world is full of lonely people who never held on to love. Last night I tried to reach you, but somehow it wasn't enough. So I said, can't you wait a bit longer? I'll give you all that a lover should give.
I'm going to take you back in time to begin with and take you back to the first record or the first song that you remember making an impact on you.
My father bought me the Beatles collection when I was very young. The Beatles were really the sort of the encyclopedia of where, or sort of a capsule of what music should sort of represent.
Was there songs in particular?
Back in the USSR, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Come Together, are songs that that flip off the top of my tongue. I used to play drums to a lot of those, a bit of Ringo, and I always wanted to form my own band.
So come on, to love the motion with me.
Well, my dad's an actor and has been in musical theatre. He always used to say to me about music is that if you can learn an instrument, you'll never starve, So I've always been a keen admirer of music. I learned piano as a kid. I'm terrible at it. I learned a bit of drums. I learned a bit of guitar. I was in the Australian Boys Choir, but I didn't really take it seriously until I was in Neighbours. I sort of was looking for another avenue to explore my creativity. And I guess, watching particularly what was happening with Kylie at the time made, record companies sit up and notice and certainly, looking for the next big thing. And I guess in a way at the time that was probably me,
Tell me how do I feel? Tell me now how do I feel?
Music in Australia was always based on pub rock in a real way for a long time. But English music, particularly probably, through the likes of David Bowie and bands like New Order, sort of changed the way people thought, and synth pop sort of broke onto the scene. One of the bands I saw as a kid growing up was New Order in Melbourne. I met Peter Hook, I met him a couple of times. The first time was at a Rewind festival back in, Cheshire, I think it was. And, I just went up to him and said, wow, I remember watching you as a kid. I think they had their backs to the audience, actually. Yeah, I think they just played to the wall at the time. It was at a boat shed in Melbourne on a place called Albert Park Lake, actually. And I think when I mentioned it to Peter Hook that night about seeing them as a young teenager, that he said, yeah, we used to do shit like that. We used to put our backs to the wall.
Time has come to say fair's fair, to pay the rent now, to pay our share.
Growing up with Midnight Oil, it changed. I mean, if you know the Oils, their whole their whole mantra is very much about Australia and natural resources and Aboriginal rights.
I mean, that is, having been talking about that back then, is quite ahead of its time, it sounds to me. I mean, because it's something that's obviously being tackled so much more now. So I wonder if that kind of, when the vote was happening just recently, that were you thinking back to the music and how that had shaped, I suppose, the way you think about it?
I think that the foundations obviously have been laid many, many years ago for these discussions, and the time has come, as Peter Garrett said, to say fair's fair. Which is from the song "Beds Are Burning." Music is a wonderful way of trying to have a voice, to people that aren't necessarily listening.
Razzle dazzle them, and they'll never catch wise.
Chicago, my dad was in 1980. He played Billy Flynn, and I was very, I watched that a lot of times as a kid, and I was in awe of his performance. It's one of the best things I think he ever did. I subsequently did it in 2019, and I don't think it was one of the best things I ever did. Musical theatre came to me by default, really, and I never set out to be a musical theatre star, but I'm sort of glad that I have invested some time in that area, because it's kept me in business for 30 years, and it's kept me, doing what I love, and it combines the two things I enjoy, which is acting and singing. I don't particularly enjoy 8 shows a week. I'm not a big fan of matinees, but the older I get, the more power I have to be able to, mitigate any of those moments. Sweeney Todd really challenged me. Priscilla was, a cool hit for me. Joseph was life-changing. Changed my life.
A crash of drums, a flash of lights, my golden coats flew out of sight.
I'm grateful to that moment that I had in Joseph, that it opened a door of opportunity to me. And some roles have worked and some roles haven't, but I'm still doing it.